it's Chelsea, where we talk about all things glam and all things girly. Today is day 2 of Chelseamas, and we are coming at you with kind of the start of my yearly favorite. So we all know that I love eyeshadow over here, and there's been 2 palettes that have just been the star of the year for me. And we're gonna do a little showdown between the 2. We have number 1, DANESSA MYRICKS Lightworks 3 palette, going up against Pat McGrath Celestial Odyssey. So I am excited to share with you both of these eye looks and giving you my kind of pros and cons of each palette, who I think these palettes will work for, and then at the end I have to make the arduous decision as to which one of these is my favorite. So stay tuned for all of that. Thank you so much for spending some time with me today. I truly do appreciate it, and let's get right into this video. Okay, so it is no secret how much I love both of these palettes. These palettes did come out, if I could say, toward the end of this year, but my goodness me, they have been my favorite palettes of the year. And that's a lot because I have tried a lot of palettes this year. These are the 2 that, like, no questions asked. I don't know, they just do it for me. So just some like basic, comparisons between the 2. We have Celestial Odyssey by Pat McGrath. This does retail for $78, and it comes with a plethora of finishes. So we have, in the palette, we have a few matte shades, shimmer shades, and metallic shades. There are none of her infamous special shades in this palette, but this palette does a very great job of, if I could say, replacing those shades with very beautiful metallics and shimmers. It does come with a very nice size mirror, and I really love this hard cardboard packaging that she has. I think she should continue with this packaging because it doesn't feel cheap, but it's very sturdy. I feel like I can travel very comfortably with this palette and it not break. Even though when I first got this palette, one of the shadows did break in here. So maybe I should take that statement back. But at least the outer packaging is quite sturdy. The shadows on the inside, a lot of people I heard did receive their first palette with shadows that are broken. So for me, I think these shadows, some of them might be a little more, they may be a little soft. So with that, take a little care when traveling with this palette if you do choose to do so, because these shadows can break. But outside of that, I think, like I said, packaging is very nice. Then we get into DANESSA's palette. This palette does retail for $125, and we have just these out of this world galactic shades. She also has a plethora of formulas. So we have cream formulations in this palette. So these 2 shadows are cream. Then we have metallics, and I forgot the other descriptions of these shades. It's like powder metallics. I can't remember it, but I'll put them here on this screen. And then we have one shade in this palette that could act as a matte shade. It is this black shade right here called Black Hole. But the rest of these shades are going to be a combination of shimmers, metallics, and so forth. This palette also comes with a very nice size functional mirror, and I really like this packaging as well. It's like basically very similar to the Pat McGrath packaging, a very sturdy cardboard. Doesn't feel cheap. I feel like these eyeshadows are protected within the packaging, and when my palette arrived, it did not come broken. I don't foresee these shadows breaking, and if they do, they're so creamy that it would be a lot easier to press these back into the pan and not have to worry about them like crumbling again. So let's get into these eye looks. Starting out with DANESSA on this side. So I first went in with the shade called Spacesuit, and if you do see any residue of like purple or other colors on my eyes, I had done another eye look, so I had tried to take off the majority of that, but that's what you see should you see any residue from the other look on this eye. So started out with Spacesuit. This is a creamy shade, and I love to use the cream shade Spacesuit and Poreless with my finger. I think they just apply best. The heat of your finger just helps the product to move across the eye better. You can use a brush because I have, and it works just fine. I just prefer my finger. So then after Spacesuit, after applying that as a base, and I did not use a primer for this eye because I feel like these cream eyeshadows really work well as a base as well. After Spacesuit, I went in with the shade called Gaia. I want to say this is probably my favorite shade in the whole palette. It is just something about this green, gold, olive shift that comes within this shade. It's just stunning, the shade right here. So after Gaia, I applied Soul, and I placed that out on the corner of this eye. This is like a creamy metallic shade, so you definitely see more texture from the shade Soul than you see in the shade Gaia. Gaia is much more creamy, feels very much like a cream, but it's a like cream to powder almost type of formulation. But still, Soul blends very easily. And what is very surprising about the shadows in this palette, ironically, there's not a lot of fallout, not as much as I thought I would have, especially with the more metallic like shades, which I'm very happy about because I tend to do my eyeshadow after I do my base, so that's definitely not an issue that I have when I am using this palette. After Soul, I think I went in with Black Hole, and if I'm going out of order, I'll just put the shades up as to what I'm using. I think I went in with Black Hole, and I wanted to use that on the lower lash line, and I really wanted to smoke that out and concentrate that black shade on the lower lash line, but then I wanted to diffuse it into the crease just to give a little bit more dimension to this transition of color, but I did not want to make this black shade intense on the upper lid. I just wanted a diffuse look of that shade. So when I was using my brush, I think I went in with the BK Beauty Angie Hot and Flashy A504 brush. I think I used this brush. I held the brush at the bottom of the handle and very lightly blended that into the outer edge of the eye, just because, like I said, I didn't want that to be too intense on the upper lid, but most definitely on the lower lash line. And then for the inner corner, I think I went in with Strawberry Moon. I think I went in with that. For this inner portion here, and then for the inner corner highlight, I went in with the shade called Golden Eclipse. I also used this shade Golden Eclipse as my highlight for today. And what I love about this whole middle row right here, you can use them as eyeshadows, but you can also use them as highlighters. And even though some of these shades might not look like your traditional highlighters, so you can see them here, and I'm so glad that she put these shades here on the back of the palette because it is kind of hard to see it just looking at the shadows themselves, but these are such complementary shades to wear on the face. Ironically, you might not think so, but they really are. So I love this highlight on the face, and although it has more texture than I would like traditionally in my highlighters, because I like my highlighters to be very smooth, you know, like melting into the skin, they do blend very nicely into the skin, and I will either go over it with a finishing powder or a setting spray to just kind of push it into the skin a little bit more, but it does not look like I have glitter chunks on my face or anything like that, which I really do like, and I think it makes it really great for the face for multiple skin preferences, right? Because if you have a lot of texture on your skin, obviously you're not going to be wanting to use maybe even a highlight at all, but definitely not a highlight that has a lot of texture, glitter, things like that, that would accentuate your texture. I feel like with these, they are so smooth that they can be used on the face even with the texture that they have. And like I said, if you use like a setting spray or a finishing powder, it just buffs the product even more into the skin. And that's the eye look over here. I mentioned before that I wanted to show you all that this palette could be an everyday palette, and I'm gonna rescind that just a little bit because I would wear this eye look in general, but I know everybody else wouldn't. So this palette is definitely going to be a more out of the box type of palette. If you're not into colors or, you know, even just this color scheme and wanting to explore using colors, then this palette may not be the one for you. But I do feel like if you wanted to achieve a more subtle eye look with the shades that you have in this palette, and when I say subtle, I'm talking in comparison to the other shades in this palette, you can pull off that type of look, because I feel like this eye look is definitely more subtle than the eye looks that I've created with this palette. But the love that I have for this palette, and I will go ahead and link my initial review of this so you can see it. My goodness me, this palette made me fall in love again with eyeshadow and just tap into my inner creativity. It made me excited and it made me go like, yes, this is what I have been looking for a very long time. Like, this palette reignited a fire and a love and a passion for just the art of makeup, and then challenging me and pushing me to do more with my eyeshadow than what I normally do. And I love this palette for it. I love you, DANESSA, for it. Thank you so much for giving this to us, and for people like me, helping me just like get even more excited, fall back in love with eyeshadow and makeup, and just, it gave me all the feels. All the feels. Okay, then moving on to Celestial Odyssey. Now, okay, let's get into the eye look. Oh, I forgot to mention this. I wanted to kind of ground the look with a transition shade for this eye look. So I did go into Celestial Odyssey and I used this shade right here, and that's what you see in my transition and what I kind of just blended this look out with. I did want to just kind of like hook it in just a little bit. So for this eye look, started out with the same transition shade or same shade, and I used that in my transition. So I did not put this shade in my crease. I just kept it in the transition area. And then in the crease, I started with this shade right here and started to build it up, concentrated into the crease a little bit more. And then I used both this shade right here and this shade right here. I just dipped my brush back and forth between the two and started to build up this deeper shade that you see on the outer edge of the eye. So I wanted this eye look to just have a little bit more intensity in that outer area of the eye, and I like the mixture of both of those shades. So for the first shimmer metallic shade that I put on the eyelid, I went in with this shade right here, which I think is really, really beautiful. This shade is a lot more sheer than it looks in the pan. So for me, the better type of brush to use with this shade is going to be a very densely packed brush. So for instance, I really like using the Sonia G flat definer brush or the Sonia G builder brush. Or I have this brush from Suku. I forgot what this brush is called, but very small, compact. What didn't work too well was this BK Beauty Angie Hot and Flashy A505 brush. It might be because this brush doesn't have a lot of hair or a lot of hairs to it. It's quite thin, and I noticed that when I went in with it, I needed something that just had a little bit more grip. And so for me, I think a natural hair brush would have more grip than a synthetic brush, or I would recommend using your finger for more pigmentation just on that shade. After that shade, I want to say I went in with this shade right here for the inner corner, and I didn't really notice a difference at all between those two shimmer metallic shades. I was just like, okay, these don't really have a difference too much. Too much. It was a slight difference, but not too much. So then I went in with this shade right here, and that gave me what I wanted for this inner corner. I thought it was so pretty, so I applied that there. And then after that, for the lower lash line, I went back in with just this deeper shade right here and built that up on the lower lash line. And then toward the inner corner, I applied this shade right here, this nice, beautiful shimmer shade. And then for the inner corner, I went in with this eyeshadow right here. For my highlight, I went in with this shade right here, and this gives a really subtle, beautiful golden highlight, nothing too intense, and I'm sure I could have built it up if I wanted more intensity from it, because this shadow definitely can be quite intense, but I really liked the sheer application of it. It gave a nice, beautiful, subtle highlight. And guys, that is the eye look for Celestial Odyssey. I love this palette. Like, when I say I love this palette, when I first saw it, I was like, okay, you know, nice little holiday palette. I didn't really think I would have much more to it than that. I was like, I know I'm gonna like it because I love Pat McGrath eyeshadows, and there is very rarely a product that she comes out with that I'm just kind of like, over it. But I don't know what it is about this eyeshadow palette. I think I do know what it is. It is such a well-rounded palette. Even though it is a holiday palette, it looks very holiday-ish to me, obviously with the packaging, but it is such a well-rounded compilation of shades that it does not stay in the holiday season. So I can wear this palette in the spring. It has beautiful spring shades. I can smoke out a look if I want to with this. It's gonna work beautifully in the summer. It works great during fall and winter. I mean, this is a full-on, well-rounded, full year type of eyeshadow palette, and I love it. I also love the different formulations that she included within this palette, being that we have metallic shades and shimmer shades. We have a couple of mattes, and I feel like with the metallics and shimmers that she gave us, there is something so special with the formulation. So it's not just a regular metallic shade that's gonna be kind of chunky and like maybe too glittery, or I need to use a little adhesive because it is so glittery and metallic-y. These are so creamy to be metallic shades. And the shimmers are just, like I said, I mean, I can use this shimmer as a highlight and it legit looks like a highlight. It has no texture to it, blended so nicely into the skin. And I'm just here for this palette. I just, you know, like I can use this palette all in one. If I don't want to reach outside of this palette for the majority of the looks that I want to do with it, I don't have to, depending on, you know, what look I want to do. If I obviously want to go with the black, I am going to have to reach outside of this palette. But for the most part, I can use just this palette to create the eye look that I want. And I feel like this palette is going to be so suitable for pretty much anybody who wants to use eyeshadow. In my opinion, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, this palette doesn't look too intimidating because we have a lot of, if I could say, neutral based shades. There are a lot of pink shades, but this palette is not just a pink based palette. And like I said, with the formulations that are included, I don't feel like even the most novice eyeshadow wearer would feel like they can't use these eyeshadows. And so I think that is one of the biggest benefits of Celestial Divinity when comparing it to Lightworks Volume 3. With DANESSA's eyeshadow palette, even though these eyeshadows are so easy to use, they are definitely easy to apply. And if you're a novice but you're not afraid of color, or you want to try color, I think you will be very surprised by how easy these eyeshadows are to use. If you're not into color, or if you're just like, look, I keep it very simple, this is not an eyeshadow palette that you're even going to be looking at. You're not going to want it. It's going to be too much for you, and it might just look too daunting with the selection of shades in this palette. Celestial Divinity, like I said, I feel like it, you know, the average person will look at this palette and go, okay, yeah, I can see looks that I could do with this. And, you know, if I want to bump it up, I can, but if I want to keep it just, you know, with my more subtle looks, I can definitely get more subtle looks out of this palette than I can with this one. Some drawbacks, some cons to Lightworks 3. Definitely number one, there are no hardcore matte shades. Like I said, this shade right here can be used as a matte because there's not too much shimmer in it, but unless you always use black as your base, you know, there's no transition shades, there's no browns, there's no creamy, like light matte cream shades. So if you wanted to go for a matte shade outside of this black shade, you are going to have to reach outside of this palette to do that. Not a problem, but if you're somebody that's like, I just like a palette to have everything that I need, that is the biggest drawback on this, or with this palette. And then, like I said, just with the color scheme, the formulations of the eyeshadows, this is not going to be everybody's cup of tea. It might look quite intimidating to some people. And once again, if you're not into like metallic shades or anything like that, this palette is not going to suit your preferences. Although it's quite beautiful, it's just is what it is. For this one, we do have a few more matte shades. So we've got 4 matte shades here. But if you're not into pink-based eyeshadows, then you can cancel out these 2. And then with these 2, we have 2 brown shades, but there's not too much diversity between the 2 brown shades. So what I mean by that is, if you wanted something much lighter, you're not going to get it from this shade. If you wanted something deeper than that, you're not going to get it from this shade. This shade, however, is quite deep. So I do feel like you can definitely use it to smoke out the eye look, but if you have a very rich, deep complexion, this isn't going to be deep enough for you, and you will need to reach outside of this palette. Same if you have a more fair complexion and you wanted something more light, you know, not as tan, you're gonna have to reach outside of this palette in terms of those like traditional, when I say traditional, transition crease shades and things like that. With this palette, if you're not into color, this might be a little too much for you as well, because we've got these beautiful pops of greens and teals, oranges, gold, this deeper shade right here. These shades might seem a little too much for you, but I don't think these are nearly as intimidating, obviously, as if we're comparing them to the Lightworks palette, and you can definitely get more subtle looks with this. But outside of that, once again, not much that I feel you can complain about in terms of what this palette does not have and what it could offer the majority of people. So, and then of course there is a price difference between these two. This is $78 and this is $125. In terms of price, Celestial Divinity is going to be a little cheaper than DANESSA. So, now I gotta sit here and tell you all which one is my favorite. And this is so hard because DANESSA's palette sparked so much joy. Like I said, it reignited my love for just makeup artistry. It's challenging me to do, you know, more creative looks. But Celestial Divinity is like everything I need in a palette in terms of, you know, like I can have simple looks, more dramatic looks. I can have all the types of textures that I want. And it's just, it is so hard. So if I had to choose and give my absolute favorite palette of the year, I don't want to do this. I'm not doing it. I'm not doing it. That's it. Okay, if I had to do my absolute, like I had to choose one of these eyeshadows, one of these eyeshadow palettes, I can't do it. This is too much pressure. Okay, I'm going to say this. My favorite palette of the year is, it has to be Celestial Divinity. But my most exciting palette of the year is going to be DANESSA. Can we do that? Favorite palette because, like I said, it just has everything in terms of like what I would need for most of my eye looks. And I can't take away that from this palette. You know, if I were to go to work, more than likely I'm not reaching for DANESSA, but I would reach for Pat's. If I'm going out on the town, depending on what look I want to go, I would reach for DANESSA's most definitely, or I might end up reaching for Pat if I'm going for something that DANESSA's doesn't have. This palette is going to be more of a palette that I'm going to wear for more of a special occasion and going out at night. This is a palette I can use for all of the above. So that's why it would have to be my favorite palette of the year. But taking nothing away from DANESSA's, because this is by far the most exciting palette that I probably have ever tried. And that says a lot because Pat McGrath's Motherships palettes, ooh, I have had some feels. If you've been here long enough, you've witnessed those. But I don't think I've ever had so much pure, unadulterated joy for a palette as when I first tried DANESSA's. So that's where we're gonna leave it at. I hope that you enjoyed this video. Let me know your thoughts down below, what your #1 eyeshadow palette has been from this year. There have been a lot, and I still am gonna do a roundup ranking my favorite palettes of the year because I've tried more and there are some amazing palettes out there. But whew, you already know what my top #1 and 2 are gonna be, because these palettes have not been overshadowed by any other palette I've tried at all this year. So let me know what your favorite palette is down in the comment section below. Let me know what you think of the eye looks. Did you think I was gonna choose Celestial Odyssey over DANESSA's? Let me know that as well. And if you've made it to this point in the video and you have yet to subscribe to my channel, I would love for you to consider subscribing and joining the Glam Girl Squad. And guys, that is it. Day 2 of Chelseamas is in the bag. Thank you so much for watching, and I really hope to see you in my very next video. Bye guys.